Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
As both a podcaster and listener, I've tried several podcast apps, and I've always kept coming back to Apple's podcast app as my default. Now, with the iOS 11 redesign, there was a huge uproar, but myself and Nick are still fans of this. Breaker is the first that I've actually been excited by enough to stick with it for more than a day. So what's so exciting about it? Well, aside from fantastic design and attention to detail, it's essentially a social podcast app. So you're probably thinking, well, how is it a social podcast app? Because, you know, you can share episodes from other apps and such. Well, this one, it's all baked into it. So you essentially connect with Facebook and Twitter. You can find your friends there. You can follow like-minded people. You can see what everyone is listening to, which is really cool. You can like, recommend, and share and comment on the episodes. Discover new things to listen to. So there's a whole lot to do, but without being cluttered, which I really, really appreciate. So to give us a rundown on Breaker, an app I thoroughly recommend listeners to try, the CEO of Breaker himself, Erik, all the way from San Fran, California, has generously agreed to take a break and talk about it. So how's it going, Erik?
It's going well. Hey, thanks so much for that introduction, Simon. I think that was a great description of the app, and thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I love the show.
Yeah, no worries. I'm really chuffed. So you also, another thanks for adjusting to this massive time zone difference we have. So it's just thanks to the power of the internet, we can get this happening. Now, before we start, speaking of differences, fun fact is I was just checking out your Twitter profile today, and I noticed that our birthdays are one day apart. So there you go.
Are you November 23rd or the 25th? I'm the 24th.
25th, yep.
Okay. I have a few other friends who were born on the 25th. It's a good birthday, good time of the year. I was born on the U.S. holiday of Thanksgiving, which I don't think you have there in Australia.
No.
But it's actually, of all the holidays to be born on, I think it's one of the best because it's not a gift-giving holiday typically, but it's one where all your relatives are there. So all your relatives get together. So you end up getting more gifts, and you're the only one who receives gifts. So it's a really nice nice holiday. I think people who are born on Christmas or other gift-giving holidays are often robbed of having their birthday feel special. But for me, it's extra special. So I think it's a great birthday.
Yeah, and then the day after mine is my son. So yeah,
oh,
it's all
wow.
happening. Yeah, wow. The planets have aligned.
Did you? Was your son born close to midnight? Like, was there some chance that he would be born the same day?
Yes, it was actually close, only a couple of hours after. And then my daughter, funnily enough, was actually born a couple of hours shy of my wedding anniversary. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay, well, it's
crazy.
You have fewer dates to remember, I guess. Easy to keep the calendar
exactly.
straight.
All right. How this all came about is Erik actually approached me from myself simply tweeting about the Breaker app, which was actually brought to my attention by Ty from the Podcast Post. So he's actually been a previous guest on Apple Slice. So it's cool to have just discovered it from something as simple as a recommendation. But rather than, carry on further with intros, let's just get right into it. I want to start with a bit of a general background. So where does your interest in podcasts or podcasting actually come from?
Well, I've been listening to podcasts for a long time. Podcasts have been around for over a decade now. And, started off obviously with the iPod before the iPhone even existed. But in the early days, it was Dave Weiner, it's kind of people doing hobbyists, people just kind of taking content and putting it out there just sort of for fun. Just to sort of see if they could, just to see if you could kind of add an audio channel to an RSS feed and how that would work and what it might look like. But nobody was really doing it professionally back then, and there wasn't that much content. And so I think podcasting just sort of fell under the radar for a number of years. And then around 2014, I was working at SoundCloud at the time, actually living in Berlin, Germany. And SoundCloud was actually the platform that hosted Serial among several other podcasts. And Serial was really the first breakout hit podcast. It was really the first podcast that went mainstream. Sort of myself and other sort of nerdy people who knew how to, sync things to their iPods could figure out how podcasts worked. But I think with the coming of the iPhone and streaming, and then that combined with great content like Serial, it made podcasting really accessible to a mainstream audience. And working at SoundCloud and kind of being able to see the numbers that Serial was driving behind the scenes, and just every week more and more, it was like a snowball. More and more people would hear about that podcast from friends and start listening to it. So every week, the number of people listening kept going up and up and up throughout the season. And it really just became this phenomenon that kind of transcended podcasting and just entered mainstream pop culture. And so that kind of gave me an idea that there was something there. There was something interesting there. And so, that kind of stuck with me. And then I left SoundCloud and moved back to the US. And around the same time, my co-founder, Leah Culver, sent me an email saying, "Hey, what do you think about podcasting?" And I had been spending a lot of time thinking about it. And Leah was a good friend of mine who had started a number of companies in the past. She was working at Dropbox at the time, but was looking to start something new. So we just sort of started hacking on Breaker nights and weekends. Didn't even have a name at the time. We came up with Breaker later. But we just sort of tried to build something. I was using Overcast at the time, and Leah was using the Apple Podcast app. And we were just trying to build something that was a little bit different from both of those experiences. And basically when it got to the point where I was able to kind of delete Overcast from my phone and use it as my main podcast player, we started showing a couple friends what we had built and getting them into the beta. And then when they had switched over to using it, that kind of gave us the confidence that we should go full time on it and actually build a company around it. So here we are about a year and a half after that.
Wow, so it's a great lead up to it. I love all your connections to such big platforms as well as Dropbox and SoundCloud. So with your background for yourself and Leah, have you always been app developers and that sort of thing? Or what else preceded that in terms of your area of expertise?
Yeah, so Leah and I are both sort of programmers and generalists. Leah's done a bunch of iOS development, and she works on all of the client-side code. So she wrote our iOS client, our iOS app, as well as our web client, which is a React JavaScript app. And I work mostly on the back end, but Leah's also a full-stack web engineer. She's done a lot of Python back-end programming, mostly with Django. And I've done a lot of work in the Ruby on Rails and sort of Ruby more broadly ecosystem, especially working on various open source packages and things like that. So yeah, we've both been engineers, software engineers for our whole careers, over 10 years now and each. And but we both are big iPhone users. I've had an iPhone since the first one came out, 2007, and so has Leah. And building a application in 2018, I think it makes sense to build for mobile first instead of building for the web first, which is how both Leah and my past companies started, with web applications.
Oh, okay, I see. So given your location and of course your technical background, have either of you actually attended any of the WWDC events?
We have. We all attended last year. The whole company sort of attended, a small company. Just four of us at the time. But and then I think Leah attended the year before. I'm more of a back-end developer, so don't work as much on iOS stuff. So I think last year was the first WWDC I attended, and I didn't actually get a conference ticket. I went to AltConf, which is one of the sort of ancillary conferences that happens at the same time in a hotel right next door to WWDC. And Leah actually spoke at AltConf, gave a really interesting talk, I thought, about sort of how we figure out what features to build, our whole product development process. I think that was pretty well received. So it was a great experience to be there, and we're gonna go back this year in June again,
jealous.
bringing the whole team.
Oh wow, yep, definitely jealous there. So you both decided to create a podcast player, and that was out of just, as you sort of stated, wanting to create something different. Was it as casual as that, or was it once you actually realized you had this working player that you thought, okay, let's really change it up with the social element of it?
We had the idea to do something social from the very beginning, but it did start off pretty casually. I mean, I think, Lee and I had been friends for a long time, but we had never worked together. So we wanted to sort of test that out and see how well we worked together as a team. And we wanted to just see if we could build something interesting, if we could build something that our friends would use and that we would use. If we couldn't build something that we thought was interesting, then, why would anyone else use it? So those were kind of the early milestones for us. Could we build something that we would use and that our friends would use? And then, it really went off from there. But yeah, it did start quite casually, just as kind of like a hobby project. But yeah, we had the idea to build a social experience from the beginning, because our experience listening to podcasts and especially discovering new podcasts was very social. Once maybe you find a podcast that you like Serial, but then, that has sort of discrete seasons. And once season 1 of Serial came to an end, it's like, what should I listen to next? Do I want to listen to other true crime podcasts? Do I want to listen to more NPR type content? And the way that you get those recommendations, we thought the best way to get those recommendations was just talking to our friends and sort of having a social experience. Serial itself seemed like a sort of social phenomenon, but the apps weren't really designed to facilitate that. People were having conversations about Serial on, not in podcast apps, but on places like Reddit on the web, which aren't really optimized for having a conversation about audio content. And you'd have to, leave the app that you're in and, sign up for a Reddit account and have a community outside of that experience, where we thought having an integrated experience really made a lot of sense. So in Breaker, you can leave comments on episodes. You can leave a comment at a specific timestamp, or you can just leave a comment generally. Where in iTunes you can, or Apple Podcasts as it's called now, you can leave a review of a show, but it's not really episode, specific. You can't say, this was a really at the 5-minute marker, somebody made a really insightful point. And, I think the ability to do that, that's something that we did at SoundCloud and was a really interesting feature for mostly music that people were commenting on at SoundCloud. And I think in some ways it's even more interesting for podcasts and for audio content.
That's what I really love about Breaker, is because, of course, I'll find an episode and it might not necessarily be the newest episode of a podcast, and I want to share it to my friend that's, say, interested in a certain band, if it's a music podcast, and then I've got to say to him, okay, well, which player do you use? And he's like, not really sure, or you have to try and instruct someone to search for the name of it, but then they have to scroll all the way back to try and find the episode, and it's all just, by that point, someone's probably already lost interest in even checking it out. So I love the fact that if your friends are within Breaker and it's all instant, you can just recommend straight away, drop a comment, be like, hey, I want you to check this out. And it's, the fact that it's all integrated like that, and I haven't come across any issues with it at all, is absolutely fantastic. So I feel very confident to share this app amongst my friends as a way to kind of spark up some conversation about episodes I've listened to.
Yeah, and we really see that as a real growth vector for us. We don't spend a lot of money on advertising or things like that. The app spreads almost exclusively via word of mouth, where someone just like you heard about it through a friend, and as a social app, it's better the more friends that you have that are using it. If you want to send recommendations to people, the best way to do that is to get them to download the app. So a lot of people have been telling their friends about it. And then once your friends sign up, it adds value to you as well. It's not just you sort of giving value to them, giving them recommendations, but then they'll listen to more things and send you recommendations. And one thing we're actually working on now, we're actually about to release, by the time this airs, it'll already be shipped, is personalized recommendations. So today in the app, we have a discovery feature, but it's sort of this global leaderboard that just looks at, what episodes have the most likes and the most comments, and we just recommend those. but we're actually adding a feature today that is going to have really personalized recommendations that looks at what you specifically and your friend group have been commenting on and listening to in the past, and making recommendations just on that sort of subgroup of data. So we've been using that internally for the past couple weeks, and the recommendations seem pretty good. We're going to keep iterating on it and making it better and better. But it's at a point now where we feel like it's good enough to put it out there and do that as well. So then, people will be using it. They'll be getting personalized recommendations. Then they can share those to their friends, and that gives us an even stronger signal of what the really best content is out there. And like you said, a lot of podcast content is very sort of timely and topical. It's like news podcasts or sports podcasts, but there's a ton of sort of deeper cuts, podcasts that are evergreen and you can go back and listen to. And surfacing that, I think, is one of the best features that we have on Breaker. It's not just about what's new, but and what's hot, which we also try to surface, but also just finding great older content that's evergreen and you can listen to at any time. And I think a lot of people just keep sharing that around. Serial, I mentioned earlier, is a great podcast, and if you haven't heard it, it's still a great introduction to podcasting for someone who's never listened to a podcast before. It's still really interesting. So and we think there's going to be even more and more great content like that coming online. On the creator side, I'd actually be curious to sort of turn the tables a bit and hear your story. I don't know if you've told it on the show before, but if not, I think your listeners would be interested to hear it. Yeah,
essentially always been an Apple fan, and that sort of has accelerated to another level of being an enthusiast or an Apple evangelist, if you will. And so basically, I was following certain Apple favored tech news sites and stuff and getting into Twitter through that purely for my kind of tech fix. And I found this other guy that followed like-minded people, who is our co-host, Nick, who is on the other side of Australia. And we sort of jokingly said, oh, hey, we should create like the Australian version of 9 to 5 Max Happy Hour, right? Because basically for us, so many of the tech podcasts were US based, and we thought, okay, it'd be good to have it from our perspective. And just try it out, and it's also a good way to kind of actually discuss this passion of mine with someone else, because, I have, friends in my hometown that are interested in it, but sort of not to the level I am. So I met like my equivalent essentially. It was purely online. It was just like I noticed he was on there and commenting here and there for about a month until we brought up the idea of, hey, do you want to do a podcast, sort of half jokingly? Then I said, yeah, I'm serious. And then we recorded our first episode a week later without having ever done podcasting before.
That's great. Yeah, it's so easy to get started.
Oh, definitely.
And I think, if you guys were starting maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you probably would have done a blog instead of a podcast or something like that. But today, I think, the trend is really to do podcasts. And, people who have blogs today and don't have podcasts, I think in the next 5 years, almost everyone who has a blog will have a podcast. Because if you have something to say, like you said, it's so easy to get started, and it's such an intimate form of communication. I think you can really build a great relationship with your audience that way, and it's good. Obviously, I make podcast software, but I love being a guest on podcasts, and I love listening to podcasts. I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts. Breaker actually tells me I have something like 3,000 episodes that I've listened to at this point. So
I saw you share that. Wow.
Yeah. So and that's another sort of fun thing that we have as a social app. Not every podcast app has this idea of like a user profile. And if you want, you can keep your profile private. But a lot of people really like to share theirs, and what's great is we keep statistics like how many episodes you've listened to, and how many followers you have, and how many people you're following. But also, if you've ever been a guest on a podcast, you can see all the guest credits, and if you're the host of a podcast, people can see that. So on your profile, Simon, people can find Apple Slice really easily. On my profile, they'll be able to find this episode as well as every other episode I've ever been a guest on, as well as all the podcasts that I subscribe to and all the episodes that I've ever liked. So it's a really interesting social profile. You know, everyone has their sort of Facebook profile, Twitter profile, Instagram profile, you know, which kind of has your photos, but there's no real place on the internet for you to have your podcast profile. So we're trying to build that as well.
I was really stoked with that. And just even having that stats of seeing how many episodes you've listened to and all that sort of thing, it just out of interest is like, oh, well, you know, maybe I do have a bit of a podcast addiction, but it's good to keep track. And I like the little fun things that happen along the way. Every time I listen to an episode, you get the little celebration animation and all that sort of thing. So it is very lively and engaging, which is great from for a podcast app, because essentially they can be quite stale, you know, by nature. And so, yeah, I really, really love what you're doing with it. So continuing on that vein, the name Breaker, how did that come about? Is it, for me, I was trying to decipher it. Is it as simple as meaning taking a break?
You know, we wanted something that had a lot of different meanings, a word that had a lot of different associations, so that it could mean different things to different people. When you start a product and a company, you know, you're going to have employees who you know, you want to find a lot of meaning in the name, as well as, you know, hopefully millions of users from all around the world someday. So we wanted something that was that had a lot of different positive associations. And so one of the things we liked about Breaker was the sort of CB radio, Citizens Band Radio association. So if you were sort of a CB radio person and you were coming online, you would say breaker, breaker, which meant you were sort of breaking into the conversation. So we love that association with it. We also, it has our logo, an app icon is a wave. And so, you know, the whole idea that it's an audio app and that, you know, sound travels in waves, and, you know, water and the ocean travels in waves as well. So we wanted that association. There's all sorts of other associations like, record breaker, rule breaker, taking a break, like you said. So we wanted something that was kind of, very broad and versatile and could, you know, people could bring their own meaning to the name. So, that's why we liked Breaker, and that's why we chose it.
Oh, that's perfect. I love this sort of multi-meaning things, because I've always say from a music perspective, love the fact that, say, you could read lyrics, say, one way and then someone else could read it another way, and having applied this multi-meaning factor to an app is really powerful, because, as you say, it could motivate someone just in a singular word in a whole bunch of different ways.
Exactly. It's really the poetry of human language. It's interesting because computer programming languages, which I work in, you know, when I'm not speaking English, I'm usually speaking some computer programming language to a computer. You know, those languages are designed to be very precise and for the language to have one very specific meaning. If you write the code one way, the computer's only gonna there's only going to be sort of one possible interpretation for that code. There's no, you don't have this sort of same concept of multiple interpretations. But I think that's one of the kind of beautiful things about human language, is that it's sort of imprecise, and you can be sort of intentionally as precise or as vague as you wish to be. And in this case, we wanted the name to be something that was kind of open-ended and open to people's interpretation.
So I've started to actually follow some of the Breaker developers and, of course, yourself in the app. So how large is the actual team today?
So we have a 6-person team. It's Leah and myself, who are both engineers, but we're also sort of running the company, hiring the team, doing all the necessary stuff. And then we have a couple other developers and designers. So the entire team works on the product. And then we just hired a customer support person as well. So if you email feedback@breaker.audio, you'll get a response back from one of our sort of support people who really, I mean, it's customer support, but it's really community management in a way, because we're building a social app, and a lot of that job is just kind of answering questions and responding to feedback. But a lot of it is really kind of helping build that initial community that we're trying to create around podcasts. So that's a big part of it. And even our community manager, we consider to be part of the product team, because they're sort of in our product planning meetings when we decide what we're going to work on next. That person sort of brings the voice of the user. What have users been asking for? What features do they really want the most? What bugs are most urgent that we need to fix this week? So that's we really, right now, everyone, it's just kind of one team, small team. And everyone really is focused on making the best product possible.
You mentioned a team of 6. Would that mean that you're located in the same city?
Most people are in San Francisco, but our community manager, support person who I just mentioned is remote, as is one of our software developers. So most of us are based in San Francisco, but that's not something that we require, and we look all over for really talented people when we're hiring, and try to just hire the best people we can, no matter where they're located.
With your approach for hiring, how did you go about actually finding people that were as passionate about podcasts and have this sort of like-minded approach to building your team?
We actually do a lot of recruiting out of our Breaker community. So one thing we did when we were looking to hire an iOS developer was look in people's Breaker bios for iOS, because it meant that for us, you need to be a great iOS developer to work with us, but you also need to have a passion for podcasts, and those are sort of equal requirements. And so we figured if you were already a Breaker user, you were probably already pretty passionate about podcasts and hopefully about our product, or at least wanted to make it better.
Okay, interesting. For a little bit of history of the app itself, when did your actual beta or testing phase take place, and then what was the official launch date?
So as I mentioned, we really started testing very casually. We used TestFlight, and originally we were just sort of building it for ourselves, and then put it on TestFlight and gave it to a few friends. And I wouldn't even call that like a proper beta, but at some point we, I guess around November of 2016, Leah and I decided to go full time on Breaker. We left our jobs and just went all in working on it. So at that point, we had a few friends using it, but I wouldn't call that a real beta group. But then shortly after we went full time, we launched a beta, and I think in November we had around 200 beta testers, and then by March of 2017 we had 2,000 beta testers, which is actually the limit. Apple has since raised it actually to 10,000, but at the time, you could only have 2,000 testers on TestFlight. And we were actually having to if somebody hadn't redeemed their TestFlight invitation, we had to delete them so that we could add new people. And that became pretty tedious. So we're like, okay, there's more than 2,000 people who want to do it. So it's probably who want to try the app. So it's probably ready to launch. So we launched March 20th, just about a year ago.
Oh, wow. So did you have any special birthday celebration in the office for it?
I sent out an email to the team, just kind of marking the milestone. But, we weren't popping champagne bottles or anything like that. We still feel like it's very early days. There's a lot more work to do. So, made a quick note of it. But, I think we've made a ton of progress in the past year since then. But
I think what you should possibly do for the next birthday is the little celebration animation you have when you listen to an episode is reenact that in real life. It's just from the ceiling or something.
Yeah. We try to reward you with confetti when you whenever you do something good. So if you every time you listen to an episode, we sort of drop confetti in the app and tell you how many episodes you've listened to. So like I said, I think I'm coming up on 3,000. When you like an episode, we kind of have hearts falling as confetti as well. So it's funny, we actually in San Francisco, there's this thing called the Color Factory that we recently went to as a team, and they have a confetti room. So we actually do have some photos of our San Francisco team, at least with confetti falling. So yeah, that was pretty fun.
Nice. All right. So in a bit of a nutshell, what would a typical day for Breaker be? Is it literally just testing and discussing and addressing bugs or anything like that?
Yeah, at this stage of a company and probably for a long time going forward into the future, I'm not sure there's ever going to really be a typical day at Breaker, at least not for me. Every day is really different, and we try to be really agile and nimble and just, wake up every morning and figure out what the highest priority thing I can do today is what'll have the biggest impact, and do that. And that's usually something different. So, sometimes it's writing code. Sometimes it's coming on a podcast like I am now and being a guest and trying to get the word out. And thank you again for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity. Some days it's, trying to hire the team and hire new people and build the team. Sometimes it's fundraising. Sometimes it's, just thinking through the product and being on a whiteboard and trying to work out new features. Sometimes it's talking to users and doing user research and figuring out, what's working and what's not in the app, what people like and what could be made better. Sometimes it's, just dealing, literally we're such a small team. I'm ordering, soda on Amazon and so the team, has something to drink while they're writing code or designing. So, and taking out the trash and doing all the things that you have to do when you have an office and a company. So
doing the hard yards.
Yeah. I think my job in a lot of ways is to do all the things necessary so that everyone else can just focus on whatever their job is and keep away distractions as much as possible. So I handle fundraising so that, the company has enough money and we can continue to operate and people don't have to worry about that. Keeping the fridge stocked with sodas and keeping, taking out the trash, literally just doing everything. So, I think CEO, it's sort of a glamorous title, but when you're at such a small company, it doesn't really mean anything. And you could just as accurately call me the janitor, when I'm taking out the trash. We don't even really have business cards, but my if we did, I would probably have what I have in my Twitter bio, which is maker, breaker.
That was perfect. Yeah. When I read that, I was like, "Oh, that is, yeah."
Yeah, I try to do whatever I can to try to make the app better for our users.
Well, you certainly sound like an awesome boss to have. So, the app itself, how has the actual response been so far? Over a year on.
It's been great. We have a really, really passionate community of people who are using the app. We've really been focused on just building that community. And basically, there's kind of two ways to think about growing your company. One is kind of top of the funnel metrics, and so just kind of getting new users to sign up for it. But what we've really been focused on up to this point is retention and basically the middle of the funnel, right? Making sure that when a user signs up, are they having a good onboarding experience? Are they kind of, when they install the app, after they install the app, are they signing up for an account? Are they adding a user profile photo? Are they filling out their bio? Are they subscribing to a couple podcasts? Are they, turning on push notifications? Things like that. To really make sure that they're set up to have a good experience, all the way through to listening to that first episode, giving that first episode a like, and then we can start making recommendations about what other episodes they would like. Maybe they invite a few friends and then send those friend recommendations. So for us, we've really been working on those flows, just getting users to stick around. And so, for us, I think it's not valuable to have a lot of users signing up for your app. We haven't spent a lot of time working on sort of press or public relations, getting articles written about us or whatever, because we want to make sure when that press comes, when those articles are written, that people have a great experience and that they really hang around. And it's not just that they sign up and they install the app, but then, after a week they stop using it. So that's really been our focus. I'm not going to talk about any numbers, but in general, we've been really happy with the retention that we've had, where when we first launched the app, but we basically doubled the number of people who, after they sign up, stick with the app. So, for us, that was a huge milestone. And that's really where our focus has been. And, there's no use getting someone to sign up for the app if there's a 80 or 90% chance they won't be using it a week from now. And so for us, that's really been our focus.
I think the fact that someone like myself, who, as much as I try alternatives, I have a real OCD approach with Apple stuff, like wanting everything to be, the Apple case, the Apple stock apps, etc. And the fact that I've been using Apple's podcast app pretty much as my default since I started getting into podcasting, and then now I've essentially switched over to Breaker, that is a good sign.
Yeah, that means a lot. And if you have any feedback on the app as someone who's been using it for a little while now, I'd love to hear it.
I'll be sure to make use of that cute little bugs feature if I do come across anything.
Yeah, but anything. I mean, really, we're such a small team and we're so nimble. I mean, we're really open to ideas. And I think, if you have an idea for the Apple Podcast app, you can send it to them and, maybe they'll build it and maybe you'll see that, they usually update the app around once a year when they update the operating system. But for us, we're pushing out releases every week. So, and one thing that we do is if you look at the release notes in the App Store, every time we do a release, if there's a bug fix or a feature, we mention the user by name. With their permission,
I saw
of course.
That.
But we mention them to try to give them credit and try to reward users for reporting bugs or for requesting great features that we decide to build. So, and every week we put out a new release. So, if you have some idea for the app, you could send us a feedback email or a bug report in the app. And maybe a week or two after that, you could actually see that bug fixed or that feature implemented. So, for us, I think that's really... a lot of the loyalty that we have in our community is because they feel like, we're not some giant company that's not responsive to our users. We're really listening all the time and very responsive to people's feedback.
That's a really fantastic approach, I think, especially giving the people credit with the bug fixes. I did see that with the latest update. I thought, that's a real nice touch, and it's sort of a feel-good thing rather than just your usual list of things saying, minor improvements, etc., to actually call someone out in a positive way. It's nice. I'm a graphic designer and obsessed with the visual side of things, particularly when it comes to app icons. Any of our listeners will know that I am more than capable of deleting a good app if the icon is bad.
I do the same thing, by the way. I won't name names, but there have been some apps that I just couldn't stand to have on my home screen. And to be honest, it's one of the things that would prevent me from ever switching to Android. I just find a lot of their default, like even the phone dialer app and all those that in the Android defaults.
It's so inconsistent. Oh.
Yeah, I can't get past it. I really... It sounds like such a petty and minor thing, but it really does matter.
It really does. Seriously, like if myself being, obviously such a big Apple fan, and then I have friends who are huge Android fans and they don't understand the whole Apple thing and why would you pay more for this, etc. And I see their home screens and it's just the biggest junk of inconsistent icons and horrible fonts and tons of little status icon. It's a mess and they think it's fine. So at least we're both on the same page there. All right. Speaking of the Apple icon, and I'm sure the listeners would love to know, who is the creative lead behind the icon, the colors, and the visual theme? I did notice that you actually had an original sort of theme, and then you had a bit of a rebrand.
Yeah. So originally when Leah and I started the company, we needed an app icon to launch, and so I asked one of my friends who worked at another company who's a designer, a very talented designer, I think, actually, to build us an app icon. And so that was the first app icon that we had, but it wasn't really part of a whole brand. It wasn't like a logo that could stand on its own. And it wasn't the kind of thing that we could put on a t-shirt or whatever. So, for us, we really wanted, or even on a website, it was really designed just to be an app icon, which was great. That's what we asked them to design, and it served us very well. But once we got a little bit bigger, and after we launched the app, we really wanted to focus on that. And so we worked with Josh Williams, who's an incredibly talented icon designer. He's done a number of icons for really big apps. He designed the Squarespace logo, which you might be familiar with.
Oh, wow. Yes,
and he was actually the founder of Gowalla. I don't know if you remember that app. I'm not sure if that one ever made it to Australia. But it was this great app that was sort of filled with these icons and badges throughout. And he designed many of those. So I think we love his taste and sensibility when it comes to icon design. And he did the entire sort of rebranding and including our logo, word mark, app icon. It's part of a whole design system, colors, fonts, everything. And he actually wrote a great blog post on our blog. Maybe, I don't know if you could put that in the show notes or something for people who are interested. But I think that's a really interesting. He just talked about sort of the whole process and how we sort of came to the final designs that we came up with. And but it was great. We're super happy with the work that he does. And that was originally just like a one-time project that we hired him for, but we actually are continuing to work with him, and he's doing all sorts of interface icons and things like that as we need them, and helping us design marketing materials and things like that. So he's not working with us full time, but he's sort of part of the team and is able to design icons for us whenever we need him to. He's also a designer for Astro, by the way, the email app. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think that has really beautiful design as well, and he's done a lot of the work on that.
I'm definitely a big fan, and I'm a huge stickler for just the fine details when it comes to icons and that. If something doesn't quite align right, or if there's a point that's off, or if there's something that's meant to be symmetrical, it's not symmetrical, I'm like the vector graphics police as such. And funnily enough, with the fact that you've given your assets, your logo assets available for download, I love the fact that it was available in such high resolution and I could see it right up close. I was like, yes, this really is perfect. And it's, really eye-catching design. And the fact that you have a logo that can stand by itself, and then the sort of zoomed-in version as such for the actual app. It wasn't just having the circular icon against a plain background. So I like that little playful variation there.
Yeah, so many apps icons are, just so boring. It's just like the first letter of the company's name or something like that, in their logo type, which, it's okay. Maybe the first app that did that, it looked good, but so many apps do that today. And we really wanted something, there's so many apps in the App Store, and you really need to stand out. So we wanted to be a little bit bolder in our design. And as you mentioned, we really sweat the details, and we love working with Josh because he does as well.
I'm a big fan of the balance of the cleanliness in the app itself and the content layout. So from a UI perspective, how intense was the research process in sort of deciding what you like or you didn't like about the design of other podcast players? Yeah,
so I had tried over the years almost every podcast player. I think I probably started off using Apple's, but then really jumped around a lot. I tried Castro and Pocket Casts, and eventually settled on Overcast. And all of these apps have a lot of redeeming qualities. There's a lot of nice features that they have, and we've borrowed heavily. We've been inspired by many of these apps, as well as apps that aren't podcast apps. We've borrowed a lot from apps like SoundCloud and Spotify and Instagram as well. But for us, I wouldn't say it was a real research process as much as it was an iterative design process where, we built a sort of early version of the app. We had this idea that we wanted to kind of build a social experience around podcasts. And it really was inspired by Instagram in a lot of ways. I think, the idea that you have, there was a lot of photo sharing apps before Instagram, but Instagram was kind of, they made it really easy, and, with filters, they made sort of lower quality camera photos more beautiful, and then they gave you the ability to add comments. And I think, you're even seeing more of that now with, things like Snapchat and Instagram stories where, a lot of the things people post, it's, sort of this annotated content. It's very social, right? It's, people doing things with friends, and they write a little caption, and it's to provoke a reaction, right? It's content that's kind of content that people create and then other people kind of talk about. And we think of podcasts in a very similar way. And so, podcasts, you create this podcast, and it's not just kind of a single player experience where you're sitting there and you listen to it and you kind of check it off your to-do list. Okay, done, listen to that podcast. But most of the apps that we saw were, to some degree or another, sort of glorified RSS readers with a play button. They were sort of these kind of task management apps, these kind of to-do list apps almost, where you would subscribe to a feed, new episodes would come in, and then you would kind of check them off your list. And for us, we have those same features. We have that sort of single player mode. And if you want to use Breaker in that way, you totally can. And it's just a nicely designed podcast app. And you don't have to add any friends. You can make your account private. You don't have to accept any friend requests. And you can just use it in the same way that you use any of those other apps. But we don't think that's the best experience. For us, that's kind of not the path that's not the default experience, and that's not the path we push you down, because we think podcasts are made, the whole experience of listening to podcasts is made a lot richer when your friends are there and when people are commenting, and you can receive recommendations and send recommendations. To us, that's kind of the core experience. So, we draw inspiration from a lot of different sources, but our process has really just been adding on features one at a time. So, originally we said, okay, you should be able to follow people. And then once you could follow people, we said, okay, let's make an activity feed where you can see what episodes they like. And then, we should have a playlist so you can add those episodes to your playlist and kind of queue them up and rearrange them and things like that. And so, and then you should be able to, if you think of somebody else who you want to send that episode to directly, you should be able to send that episode to them directly. And so for a while, you could send someone an episode, but then they couldn't respond. And, so now then we very recently added a messaging feature. So if you send someone an episode, they can reply and say, oh, thanks for sending me to that. And then here's an episode for you. And it's more of a conversation. And then, one thing we haven't built this yet, but it's on our roadmap to add to that feature is in the same way that you have read receipts or read receipts. I don't know how you pronounce that. In an app like the Messages app on an iPhone, where it tells you when the message has been read. We want to do the same thing with podcasts, where if you send a podcast to a friend, you can see when they've listened to it, and then you can engage them in a conversation about that, and you can see if they've liked it, and then you can say, "Oh, great! Glad you liked that episode I sent you." So
that's perfect, yeah. Because there's been many times where I've been like, check out what they're discussing here, or hey, check out this interview with this person, and you send it to someone hoping they'll use it in whatever app they're listening to. And then you're sort of checking up on them a couple of days later. Hey, did you listen to that episode yet? And they're like, I haven't quite got around to it. So it's good that you've taken out that guest factor as well in terms of sharing stuff, and the fact that it is also all happening within Breaker. If the person you're sharing to also within Breaker, then there's a far more likely chance they're going to have listened to it anyway, because they don't have to take the extra step to search in whatever their current player is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really that sort of iterative approach of just kind of building features one at a time. We actually took the very similar approach to our redesign. So in addition to Josh Williams, who's sort of our visual designer, icon designer, logo designer, we also have a great UX designer who I should mention and give credit to as well, Emma Lundin. And before Emma started, Leah was doing all of our design, and I thought she actually did a great job. I think for someone who's not a designer, for someone who's a developer, I think Leah has an incredible eye for design and talent for it. But then once we hired Emma, it really sort of leveled up our entire design within the app. But the way we did it was we took a really iterative approach. So the same way that we sort of build features iteratively and just are shipping as often as we can, usually around once a week, and then just looking at the feedback, looking at how people are interacting with those features, and then layering more features on top. We did our redesign the same way. And instead of kind of, holing up for 6 months and redesigning the entire app and then, launching a giant 2.0 with every single screen redesigned, we actually just redesigned one screen at a time. And we started with the screens that people use the most. And then we started getting feedback on that and said, okay, what do you like about this design? What's working? What's not working? And then we were able to sort of evolve that as we built it. And so Emma actually recently published a blog post on our blog about that whole design process. So like now, 6 months after she's started at the company, every single screen in the app has been redesigned. But it wasn't like that happened all at once. It really, overnight, it really happened just week by week and through constant iteration.
Thanks for the very descriptive answer. That's essentially answered my next question.
Great.
Which is cool. But I did want to quickly point out that some things I am impressed by with it from a user experience and design perspective is the inclusion of the haptic feedback. Always love that when apps take advantage of that. The fact that if you screenshot it, it triggers a contact support for bugs, which is really fantastic. That surprised me at first. I was like, that's such a great feature.
We use a third-party service called Bug Life for that. But if you and a lot of people are sort of delightfully surprised by that. But whenever you take a screenshot of the app, we say, oh, do you want to report a bug? And if you say yes, then we let you kind of annotate that, so you can, draw arrows, or you can blur things out if there's private information that you don't want to share with us. But it's a great feature, and a lot of our feedback comes through that mechanism. Yeah,
fantastic. Also love the ability to flick the condensed player away when it's paused. Yep. The fact that the comments are auto timestamped is fantastic, and just the fact that, which I'm a real stickler for, is that everything is so damn crispy. Like it's like Retina display from edge to edge, pixel to pixel. I noticed that you did a tweet not that long ago about how horrible the compression was on the avatars in Twitter when you're doing a post, and I'm so glad that I haven't seen anything like that within Breaker. It's definitely serving the my iPhone 10 screen very well.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty tricky problem. It's a little bit harder for us than it is for Twitter, because the Twitter avatars, if you want a Twitter avatar, you have to upload a photo to Twitter. But for us, all of the content for podcasts comes from around the web, right? It comes from these RSS feeds. That's kind of the technology that fundamentally underlies podcasts. So, and we don't have any control of that. We don't, there's a standard, but the standard doesn't specify, what resolution the photo should be. The artwork should be for podcasts, and people use, some people use JPEGs, some people use GIFs, some people use PNGs and other formats. Some people have very high resolution images that you actually do want to, if you're showing it in just a thumbnail, you want to resize so that it'll load faster, and you want to compress it. But you want to compress it in a way that it's not losing resolution or quality. So we are very thoughtful about that, and obviously want to be respectful of the creators, people who have a podcast and create their artwork for the podcast. They presumably have pride in that creation. They want it to look good, and we don't want to sort of do anything to that wouldn't show it in its best light. So, for us, we try to be very thoughtful about that, and but also make a great user experience where, if somebody has a 5 megabyte image as their artwork, that's very high resolution. That's great. But if we're showing it as a thumbnail, we'll shrink it down and compress it, but without losing any quality.
Everything with it ticks all the boxes for me. So there's everything I mentioned that then, but as you said, your work with Josh down to the font family used and everything, that is an example of, okay, so you have such a big popular podcast player as Overcast. The reason I never stuck with it is because I didn't like the font.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, actually. I know, Marco has, he has his own podcast, and he's talked about why he chose it and why he likes that, but I happen to agree with you.
Yeah, so I was very pleased. Amongst all the other things I mentioned, that was one I definitely liked. So this next question, which you don't have to answer if you don't want to, is from a business viability perspective, and the fact that I've seen no ads within the app, what actually funds Breaker?
Yeah, so we have some very, wonderful investors who believe in what we're doing and have given us enough money in the bank so that we're able to just kind of really focus on the product and build out the user experience and not have to worry about monetization at this point. Obviously, they're investors, so at some point they'll expect a return on that investment. But for us, it's really not an immediate focus. And the way that we think about it and the way that our investors think about it is that, if the app never reaches scale, then it's not really worth monetizing anyway. So, until we get, maybe 1 million users or something like that, it doesn't really make sense to show ads or charge money. So for us, we'd rather just have a great user experience, and hopefully that'll allow us to build a huge audience of millions of users. And then at that point, hopefully we're delivering enough value to people that they're willing to either pay for the service on a subscription basis, or maybe we'll have some sort of advertising business model. My preference between those two business models would be the subscription. And I think there's a lot of examples. Spotify, which is now $30 billion company by valuation, has a very simple business model where you pay them $10 a month or something like that for to be a member of the service, and they have 60 million people or more doing that now. And Apple has a competing service with also tens of millions of users paying for subscriptions. Amazon has a competing service as well with tens of millions of subscribers. So there seems to be people have a willingness to pay for music, at the very least for audio, and hopefully they'll be willing to pay for non-music audio as well. And what's great about that is then we can use that revenue, we can share some of that revenue with the content creators so that they don't have to have ads in their content. They can be supported by that subscription revenue as well. And then that creates an even better user experience. So, users won't have to listen to ads. Creators like yourself won't have to interrupt the content with ads. And people, in exchange for that, users will pay, something like $5 or $10 a month, which is a business model that's worked very well for, not just companies like Spotify and Apple Music, but also services like Netflix. In the US, we have Sirius, which is a satellite radio subscription service, and they have music, but a lot of their content is talk radio as well. And a lot of that business was kind of built on having an exclusive of Howard Stern, who has a very loyal audience, and people are willing to pay a subscription to listen to. So we think there's an opportunity to do something like that with podcasts. It's actually not that different from satellite radio. When you think about the content, it's just a different delivery mechanism. And in some ways, having the delivery mechanism on your phone, which you take with you everywhere, and can stream to other devices, makes a lot more sense than having it built into a car, or some other delivery mechanism. So that's what we're thinking about. But to be honest, either it's going to be it's going to catch on, and people are going to love the app and tell their friends about it, and we'll have millions of users. And if we do that, I'm confident we'll be able to figure out a business model, or not. And then at that point, thinking about the business model this early is really just a waste of time.
Certainly some great insight into, how the actual whole app development thing works in terms of your involvement with investors and such. So, obviously I wish the absolute best for the future of Breaker. I'm really excited about it, being a week and a half into it. Definitely plan on sticking with it. So I'm really keen to see what else you can roll out with the app. So given the nature of this podcast, I'm a big iOS enthusiast. And while it's stated on your site that you have an Android version coming out, are you actually planning on expanding the iOS version with other features such as 3D Touch Quick Actions, Peek and Pop, and notification center widgets, stuff like that?
Yeah, so we recently added Peek and Pop. I don't know if you noticed on the playlist, you can actually Peek and Pop. I think we shipped that maybe a month ago.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so we're adding new features all the time. I mean, the app is nowhere near done. We have tons of ideas. And every other Monday, we have a product planning meeting where the entire team comes together and we just brainstorm. We just talk about what are the best ideas that we have. No bad ideas. People, can bring anything. They can bring ideas that they've had. They can bring ideas that come from users. And then we put them all up in a document, and then we prioritize them. And, we just try to, for the next 2 weeks, work on the highest priority ideas that we can think of. And then after 2 weeks, we build as many of those high priority ideas as we can. And then we basically just do a reset after that, where we don't, if something doesn't get done, we don't roll it over, because our view is that, every 2 weeks, the world has changed, the priorities have changed. So, we just start over from scratch, throw everything away, and try to build what's most important for the next 2 weeks. Some of the features you've mentioned, like the ability to do what is it called? Smart actions from the app icon.
Yeah, quick actions.
Actions. Yeah. We've talked about doing that, and it just hasn't been a high. We've talked about if we did them, what would the smart actions be? Maybe it would be play the first thing on my playlist, or something like that. But it's never and some users have requested it, but it's never been a high enough priority thing where we've scheduled it for the next 2 weeks. But maybe we have another meeting next Monday, so maybe we'll decide to do it then.
Yeah, I certainly think something like a notification center widget, which appears as a 3D touch quick action anyway, if you do have one, like the current Apple Podcasts app just has, it has the cover art of like 4 new episodes of ones that you're subscribed to. And tap and can play or continue playing from there. So just something like that, I think, could be useful. I'm sure you could come up with a even more creative way of implementing that. But yeah, I'll be sure to contribute any suggestions that I think of along the way.
Please do. And that's really how we, it's a big, if users ask for things, that's a big weight into how we prioritize things, like which features to build. If users are sort of knocking down our door, demanding that we build this feature, then it's very likely that we'll build that. So, I would say don't just request the feature, get your friends to request it as well if they sincerely want it. And if we get 20 requests for the same feature in a week, there's a pretty good chance we'll prioritize that for the following week. So, like I said, we try to be really responsive and always listening to our users. And it doesn't mean we're always going to do exactly what our users tell us to do, but we do listen. Every email and feedback email that gets sent goes to the entire team, and we read them and we consider them really carefully. Obviously, we have our own priorities and need to, we're not always just going to sort of let the users drive the company. But insofar as, we're trying to come up with ways to make the product better and just keep delighting users, it's definitely one of the big inputs into our process.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear. Something that may or may not be a priority is, have you ever considered looking into a Breaker Apple Watch app? Now, I know that the framework is quite constricted for developers, particularly with the struggle to create podcast watch apps. Like I've heard the entire saga of what the guy from Overcast went through for his app. Do you think you would explore that idea any further, or would you rather say wait for this year's WWDC to see if they can expand the framework more?
Well, I am eagerly awaiting this year's WWDC. We actually have explored the idea of building a watch app. We had a hackathon in January of this year, earlier this year, where one of our developers spent the hackathon building a primitive watch app and got it working. It was running in the simulator, but when she tried running it on the watch, it wouldn't work correctly, and it just had a lot of bugs, and she was really struggling with the sort of limited capabilities of the watch. I think she was also using, I can't remember if it was a first or second generation Apple Watch. It wasn't the latest generation. And, because it was sort of a hack day project, she wanted it to work on the watch that she had. She didn't want to have to go out and buy a watch, or for it to only work for people who have the latest watch. She wanted it to work on every Apple Watch. And so, it was just so slow and it wasn't a good user experience. So we decided not to actually turn that into not to ship that, not to turn that into part of our product offering. Definitely open to it in the future. Leah is a big runner, and she has the latest generation Apple Watch. I also have an Apple Watch. I actually still have my first generation Series 0
Oh, okay.
Apple Watch. But yeah, it's interesting. For now, we're mostly sitting on the sidelines. I listen to Marco's podcast and have listened to his struggles and his thought process about, releasing an Apple Watch. And then, I think it broke and nobody even noticed for a long time. In one release, the Apple Watch functionality broke, but nobody actually reported it, which kind of indicated to him that not that many people were even using that functionality. And I think at some point he decided just to scrap it because it was such a suboptimal user experience. And, maybe it'll return to Overcast in the future, and maybe it'll come to Breaker at some point. But to be honest, the way I use my Apple Watch today is mostly just the default apps that are built into it. And I think Apple actually made a mistake of shipping third-party apps with the first version of Apple Watch. I think they should have done the same thing they did with the iPhone, where the first version of the iPhone, there was no App Store. It's hard to even remember. But, there were no third-party apps unless you jailbroke your phone. But, most people didn't, and you had to just use the, 15 or 20 apps, however many there were that came on the phone. Having that 1 year to kind of figure out how people were going to use the watch, instead of just kind of having this ecosystem, this third-party ecosystem from day one, I think was actually a mistake. And if you look at sort of the changes they've made in the latest version of watchOS, I think they've kind of backtracked from, it used to be that grid view of all the app icons.
We commonly refer to it as the honeycomb, but
right. But everyone knows what I'm referring to. That's not really a good interface for picking apps. And, if you have more than a handful of apps, it just, it becomes impossible to really find what you're looking for. And, there's a couple third-party apps that I do use, but I think in some ways I might be happier with the device overall if it was just restricted to first-party apps until it got a little bit sort of faster, more powerful. Maybe with the third generation of the watch, they would have third-party apps that were only available if you buy that new, faster hardware. And then I probably would have upgraded, but I still haven't upgraded. I'm still using my original Apple Watch, which I got the day it came out. And it's fine, but I use it mostly to, tell the time, set a timer. I'll use it for if I don't have my phone, Siri actually can be handy sometimes, if you have a quick question or something like that. It's great for getting notifications. If someone sends you a text message or an email or something like that, you can just kind of glance at it there. Probably not reply, but at least know, receive messages that way. And we do have, insofar as we use the standard audio player controls, you can play and pause Breaker from your watch, which is great. I'll do that sometimes. And we send push notifications, which if you have them turned on, you can receive those push notifications on your watch as well. But in terms of having a third-party app, I just haven't seen that many great third-party Apple Watch apps. I don't know if there's any that you use, but personally, I just haven't found any.
I do my banking one is really good.
What do you do? Do you check your balance or?
That's basically it. If I basically want to check my balance, or if I've forgotten my card and I need to request cardless cash, so that's withdrawing money from the ATM without actually my card, I can do that. I can find the nearest ATM, that sort of thing. So that works well. But yeah, the general consensus is the first-party apps are the best, and that's where this gap has been with podcasts, is because there's no Apple Podcasts app for the watch, and people have been asking for it since the start. So it's been fingers crossed from Nick, my co-host, and I that they will release it with watchOS 5. There have been some attempts to kind of fill that space. I'm actually currently using one called Outcast. It sort of does a little bit of a workaround job of doing it, but it's the closest that I have.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, because I have the Series 3 with cellular, I want to be able to go out for my walk without my phone and listen to podcasts, essentially. So my music's covered with Apple Music, that's fine. But yeah, it's basically that. But since using Breaker, because I want to keep all my play history within Breaker, I was a few hours before this walking the dog, and yeah, as you pointed out, works perfectly with the now playing. Pulled my AirPods out, paused, put them back in, continued. So yeah, it's good that you've tied in with that default functionality too.
One thing we would love to see at the upcoming WWDC is better integration with HomePod. I know, there's been some rumors that it, hasn't been that popular of a product selling. I think, Apple sold a lot more Apple Watches than HomePods, but that's one place where I wish they did have third-party integration, and they don't. And I think, if it was simple to kind of be able to give a voice command to your HomePod, a lot of people want this for Spotify. But we'd love to have that for Breaker. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that they'll announce something like that at the upcoming WWDC. But I think we'd probably build a HomePod integration before an Apple Watch.
That would be fantastic.
One, just because it just makes so much sense, and it's very simple. I mean, we'll see what they release, if they release anything. But I think because it's a pure audio interface, if you could say something like, hey Siri, or whatever, I just activated my device. But anyway, if you say the magic phrase and then say, start playing my playlist on Breaker, or play this episode on Breaker, play the latest episode of my favorite podcast, play the latest episode of Apple Slice on Breaker. The ability to sort of interact with voice in that way, I think would be great. And we'd love to integrate with HomePod and even with Siri on the phone that way. If you could tell Siri to launch Breaker and start playing something.
Yeah, definitely. If they open up Siri kits to more categories, would be fantastic.
Right. And in some ways, I think that makes more sense than quick launch, where, maybe if you're driving, if you're in a sort of hands-free mode, you could just speak to the phone and tell it what you want to do, which is a pretty common use case for listening to podcasts.
Is it literally just Breaker 24/7 at the moment, or is there any other little app ideas floating around?
No, we're all in on Breaker. We really believe in what we're doing, and just wake up every morning, run into the office trying to make it better. So for us, that's top priority.
All right. Well, thanks very much for appearing on Apple Slice. I was super excited, telling my co-workers that I'm like, hey, I've got a CEO of this upcoming podcast app all the way from America. I'm going to be recording it tonight. So yeah, I can't wait to share this episode with them. I'll definitely encourage people to listen to it on Breaker as well. So that'd be fantastic to get more of my friends on board that way. Funnily enough, it's actually dawned upon me that this is an episode of a tech podcast discussing podcast tech, featuring a podcast tech leader leading tech discussion about podcasts.
It's all very meta.
Yeah.
But thanks so much, Simon. I really do. I appreciate you having me on as a guest. It's great. Like I said, I'm a fan of Apple Slice and everything that you're doing, and really appreciate you encouraging your listeners to check out Breaker. I always tell people, try it out for a week. We have very good import and export functionality. So if you're using another app today, whether it be Overcast or Apple Podcasts or Pocket Casts, you can import all of your subscriptions into Breaker and switch over very easily, and just try it for a week and see if you like it. Maybe invite a few of your friends to try it as well to really get that social experience. And if after a week you don't like it, just send us an email and tell us why you're switching back to the app that you started off using. But what we've seen is that when people give it a try, they usually stick with it. And so that's really encouraging for us. And again, just really, really appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Yeah, awesome. I very much appreciate that too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what's next for Breaker. I'm going to be paying close attention to your update notes. And I really hope Breaker is featured at a Apple event someday.
Well, keep those requests coming. We actually were in the keynote. We weren't featured, but when they announced the new App Store last year, there was they actually featured Breaker in the keynote as one of the apps in the new App Store design. So we had no idea that was going to happen.
I'm going to go rewatch that. Wow.
Yeah,
that would have been a big surprise.
Yeah, no, it was great. The Apple, I think a few days before WWDC, we got an email from Apple saying, hey, we want to, you need to sign this release for permission to use your icon in one of our sessions at WWDC. But we had no idea it was going to be in the keynote. So that was really thrilling for us. And we were all going crazy watching the keynote. So
excellent. Awesome. Thanks very much for your time, Erik. Better get back to some podcasts in Breaker now.
Sounds good. Okay. Bye, Simon.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.